So this is my other car that I've been setting up and developing for the silver can class at RCHR. Again, I can't quite race in the class yet. It has a lot to do with like bringing my kid to the track and having him be able to stay late enough for the actual races. So, you know, maybe this coming winter I'll be able to do that. We'll see. But for the time being, I want to use the time that I have at the track to try a few different cars with a silver can setup to see which one works the best. Because I love developing my stuff while I can. So, this is a Kyosho RB5 SP2, which is a little bit different from the original RB5. First being that it came with big bore shocks. Second being that the rear shocks are shorter and the rear shock tower is also shorter. I believe that was to reduce the center of gravity on these buggies at the time as the grip level of the tracks was going up, but they were still using a rear motor layout. So between the RB5s that exist, this one would be the best for astroturf because it has a lower CG at the rear. Okay, fine. Now, I don't remember the gearing that I have for this. I'd have to check that, but nonetheless, I do kind of the same setup with the electronics that I have for the YZ10 in terms of the LiPo cutoff being a separate switch that also handles the signal wire coming from the speed control. So I bypass the internal BEC of the speed control. And I have a fan here to keep the motor cool. This motor, when after running for several minutes, it comes off at around 90 degrees Fahrenheit or so. So it stays nice and cool. That means the magnets stay strong. I get plenty of power to clear all the jumps, through a run. So in terms of gearing, it works great. Key things that I did to this to make it handle well on turf are really suspension geometry. I can get into the shocks a little bit, but that's kind of less important than the geometry changes that I made. So I'll start with the front. On the front, I use, because it's a rear motor car, I want to get more aggressive steering on the front and move the weight forward. So actually the first thing I do is I take a shorty LiPo and I push it all the way forward. So that helps me to balance the weight distribution because I'm trying to sort of counteract the motor hanging behind the rear axle. So take a shorty pack, push it all the way forward. That's number one. Number two is short camber link. So this, I use the outside hole on the front bulkhead, and it's just a standard ball stud here. It's not the low mount ball stud, just a standard ball stud on the outside hole. And then I use the inside hole here on the front caster block. So highest possible camber gain on the front. Okay. These are associated purple springs. I believe on the inside, I have my setup notes somewhere else, but these are probably 5 by 1.2 pistons with something around 35 or 40 weight oil at the front. No shock limiters on the inside. Okay, outside hole on the tower and on the arm. I'm also on the outside hole there. And, this can get me, I can get plenty low of a ride height here. I don't have any ride height issues, front or rear. One thing I've thought about doing, by the way, was using gull-wing arms on the front and rear, which I think would be a really interesting thing to try for an RB5. I'm not there yet. I don't think it'll be completely necessary, but just to try something cool and different, I think it would be kind of neat to try. But anyway, moving on. On the rear, this was really where you need to spend a bit more of your effort to really get it to corner nicely, especially around high-speed turns, because you have all this stuff here that gives you a high center of gravity. You don't have a lay-down gearbox, right? You have this kind of stand-up rear motor gearbox, and that's going to make the rear roll a lot. And without a sway bar, you need geometric anti-roll. So you got to play around with roll center. A lot of making stuff run well on astroturf is really about roll center. So what do? Well, on the inside here, let me just make sure I got it right. Yeah, so I use a low mount ball stud on the inside. I think I'm on the middle hole. There's 3 holes here. I'm on the middle hole. So that's either a Kyosho or a low mount ball stud. And then on the outside here, you do the opposite. So I have a high mount ball stud with another 2 millimeters of spacer and I'm on the inside hole on the hub carrier. So that gives me, you know, close to the highest amount of camber gain and the highest possible roll center. The other thing I do, maybe it's hard to see, let me see if I can get better lighting in here. There we go. So this is the RB5 style rear hub carrier where you have 3 holes where you can mount the lower hinge pin. This is really important because on the more modern RB6s and RB7s, this rear hub carrier only has 1 hole here, and it's just the topmost hole. So with these 3 holes, you use the bottommost hole that pushes the axle up, which helps you drop the rear, reduce the ride height. What it also does is it increases the offset between this outer ball stub position and this inner ball stub position. So when this thing is at rest, right, you get this inward angle here. So this gives you also a higher roll center. When I ran this the first time, I was having traction roll issues because I was using either the middle or the upper hole on the hub carrier. When I changed it to a lower hole, oh my god, made a huge difference in the handling. And I can go pretty much full speed around the high-speed sweeper that's after the start-finish line. I can just whoosh, go straight around that, no problem whatsoever. Those are the big things you need to worry about in terms of setting up the suspension on this car. The rear springs, what are these rear springs? I think they're Kyosho Golds. I'm pretty sure they're Kyosho Golds. And I use a relatively soft setting on the rear, so if they're golds, maybe I have something like, 35 or 30 weight oil with, again, probably a 5x1.2 piston. I'd have to check my notes. But really, it's really the geometry that matters a lot more than your shock setup. But the shocks are set up pretty nicely for this. So that's the thing. Getting these RB5 rear hub carriers with the 3 holes makes a huge difference. This thing actually right now, it drives better than my YZ10. I was able to run more consistent laps and faster laps more consistently. So once I make a few more changes to the YZ10, that'll hopefully help it drive more consistently, then I'll have a more fair comparison between the two to see which one drives better. But this one I was getting down to, I think my best lap was like a 13.4, which is pretty good for silver can buggies. The stock buggies running a 17.5 are also in, like, let's say the mid to high 12s. So this isn't far off, and it's a rear motor silver can chassis, so that's really good. So anyway, right now, this is my top contender for a silver can entry, but we'll see how things go in the future. The YZ10 is going to take a bit more work, but I think I'll get there. And then I also have some Schumachers, a Cat 3000, and maybe a Cat 98 that I'll set up for silver can as well, and I'll be able to compare those and see how they run. So yeah, that's it for now. Hopefully this is educational for those of you that want to run car like this on turf, and thanks for watching.